Welcome to week 4 of our advocacy journey, strategy planning and creative change. I'm Peyton, and today we're going to be exploring how to turn your insights into thoughtful action through trauma-informed strategy and planning. Remember, throughout this session, please engage at your own comfort level. You can pause, take breaks, or simply observe whenever needed. And also, as a reminder, we are now halfway through this series, which is extremely exciting. Okay, let me just share my screen. Okay. Before we begin, let's take a moment to ground ourselves. Take a slow, deep breath. Notice where you feel supported. So, by your chair, maybe, by the floor. Remember that you control your level of participation today, and know that all experiences and perspectives are valuable here. If you're feeling a little bit more anxious, I'm going to teach you guys a grounding technique, and you can do this whenever you're anxious. Close your eyes and become ready. Okay. You can open your eyes and look at 5 things you can see in the room. Once you've done that, you can do 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. Once you've done all of that, make sure you just take another deep breath. And this can really help you just remind yourself to stay grounded. Okay, now I think we're ready to jump in. Let's begin by examining advocacy campaigns, recognizing that different approaches work for different communities and situations. I've worked on projects like Know Your Rights for immigration differences and people that are undocumented and feel worried about immigration officers coming for them. And so ways in which you can support them is by knowing your rights and knowing their rights. And then also, as I'm sure a lot of you know, being um, that there were a lot of wildfires in California over this last year, and ways in which you can support people who have been through natural disasters is just by calling your representatives and telling them that you feel that these people need added support. So these 2 examples, knowing your rights and calling your representatives, are elements that have clear goals that respect community needs, use careful use of available resources, include engagement and stakeholders, have flexible timelines. So for example, you can call your representative on your own time. Knowing your rights is just something that you can do on your own time as well. And then outcomes that are measured in meaningful ways to the community. For instance, for a metric for knowing your rights, you can track with a survey how many people have used your resource, and calling your representatives, you can have numbers knowing how many people have called. So these campaigns work by honoring both the goals and the well-being of everybody involved. Okay, moving on to trauma-informed goal setting. Setting goals is more effective when we acknowledge our experiences and capacity. We're going to use a modified SMART framework. So SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. For specific, we're going to clearly define what matters to you and your community. Measurable, choose tracking methods that feel right for you. Attainable or achievable, honor your capacity and available resources. Relevant, connect to values important to you and others. And then timely, set flexible time frames that allow for self-care. Creating supportive measurement. When measuring progress, we want to be thoughtful about how we collect data. For quantitative data, it's important that it remains optional and it has anonymous participation, that there are multiple ways to improve input, and that there's a clear explanation of how the data will be used. For qualitative data, space for personal narratives is extremely important. You want to allow people to share what they are comfortable with. Also, no pressure to share difficult experiences. Advocacy is about telling what you feel comfortable with, not what somebody else wants you to share. and appreciation for all levels of engagement. Remember, measurement should never cause harm or trigger past trauma. Developing responsible timelines. Let's build timelines that honor everybody's capacity. Start with realistic end goals, space between activity, and regular check-ins. Then add self-care periods, flexibility for unexpected needs, and celebration of small victories. An important principle is to build in recovery time and recognize that healing and change aren't linear processes. If you're doing this project with somebody else, being able to check in and acknowledge what is a reasonable time frame for both of you is essential. If you're doing this with by yourself, the basic principles don't change. You still need to have realistic end goals and be able to have space between activities. And then those regular check-in points may look a little bit different, but it is still important to check in with yourself and recognize which ways that you feel under-supported and which ways you maybe need to take a step back and reevaluate. Okay, choosing trauma-sensitive tactics. Let's explore the tactics that prioritize safety and choice. With educational approaches, optional participation methods are encouraged, content warnings when needed, and multiple learning styles accommodated. So that's if you're going to be teaching somebody to how to do something in a classroom. Community engagement, make sure there are accessible meeting locations. So maybe trying to evaluate whether or not somebody can get there with public transportation is a good idea. Various ways to contribute, and clear beginnings and endings. So that is, you're setting a community goal. What is going to be the clear and actionable item on the table? And with relationship building, so maybe that is maybe legislative or learning how to interact with a legislative member, transparency with officials, supporting each other during challenges, and then honoring boundaries in all interactions. Match your tactics not only to your goals, but to everybody's emotional safety needs. Because as I know I've said a lot, it's probably getting really redundant and maybe annoying, but it's really important to remember your needs come first, and it's very important that you honor them. Okay. Compassionate resource mapping. Every advocacy effort requires resources, including emotional support. So, for instance, with human resources, people with diverse lived experiences are important, care team members are important, and supportive roles with different comfort levels are also great. Material resources require comfortable access of accessible spaces, calming supplies, sensory considerations, etc. For well-being resources, support contacts are great to have. Grounding tools like the exercise we did earlier and self-care planning are all essential. And for financial considerations, transparent budgeting, equitable resource allocation, and reduced financial barriers to participation are all great. These are all elements of a healthy community that are good to acknowledge when you're considering resource mapping. Okay, now let's bring everybody together into an action plan that centers well-being. Your plan should include goals that matter to your community, tasks with multiple ways to participate, flexible timelines with built-in rest, required resources, including support, communication agreements, and regular check-ins on emotional impact. When we develop all of these action plans, it's important to anticipate and address challenges because they're absolutely going to come up. Nobody is able to develop anything that doesn't have any sort of challenge. So, because challenges are a part of advocacy, we can prepare in ways that protect our well-being, including identifying potential difficult moments. For instance, if you're asking somebody to share their story, that might be somewhere where a difficult moment arises. Creating supportive response plans, building networks of care, developing collective resilience, and having permission to pause or redirect. Taking care of yourselves and others isn't secondary to your goals. It's essential for sustainable change. That should always be your number one priority. Collective care during implementation. As you implement your plans, prioritize well-being by checking in regularly with yourself and others, recognizing signs of stress and overwhelm, Celebrating progress, no matter how small it is. If one person fills out your survey, that's still one person, and that's really exciting. Adapting plans as needed, and honoring when somebody needs to take a step back. Remember that advocacy is more effective when we sustain ourselves through the process. If somebody during this advocacy series feels like this is a lot to take on, it is totally okay to approach it as I'm going to take a break and come back to this when I can. As we conclude today, I invite you to reflect on what feels most meaningful and doable for you in this planning process. There is no single right way to create change. Before our next session, consider taking one small step from your plan that feels manageable and aligned with your values. And remember, even pausing to rest is a part of the process. Thank you so much for your presence today. Let's take one final deep breath together before we close. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.